Oh, and we're live. There we go. Hello, everybody. We're a wee bit early. Thought we'd pop in about a minute or two early, just before we're due to start at 9 o'clock. But we had a few problems trying to get on YouTube last time, and just seeing green lights there. So hopefully it all can be heard okay. Just going to adjust my monitor a wee bit. But yeah, we had a bit of sorry about that. There we go. That's better. All wibbly wobbly. But yeah, we had a bit of bother getting on YouTube the last time, so we thought we'd just quickly pop in early, grab our coffee and all that, and make sure everything's working all right, so we're not too tardy. And thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the station. And tonight we're going to have a look at Chapter 5 of Dune. So say hello, anybody, if you're out there. Hi, there's Joseph. Howdy, says Joseph. Hi, Joseph. Babs, evening, Doc. Evening, Babs. How are you? Probably afternoon where you're at. Excuse me. But yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, folks. I hope you're all looking after yourselves. Thanks very much for joining us. And yeah, tonight, I suppose we're going to have a wee look at Chapter 5, which is we've been looking through the different I suppose talking about Paul's tutors and his teachers. And of course, the one that we have a couple that we haven't seen yet, but we're kind of going through them, and it's time to have a look at Doctor Yueh. There's Cynthia saying hello. Hello, Cynthia. Excuse me. Yeah, and Doctor Yueh is quite an interesting character, I think. And once again, massively underused in the new film. And he works on a few different levels, even after, I suppose, even when he's left the story. But as usual, we begin with our epigraph. This isn't a particularly long chapter. We have this one and the one that will follow, which will finally introduce us to Leto, and then the action will shift in the book, and we'll move from Caladan to Arrakis. So, as much as we've been teased about Leto quite a bit, the point we've been making is that Paul's always seems to be looking for his father, but he's never there. Excuse me. And we'll get a Joseph. Thanks very much. We'll get a let me see. We'll get it's always a little setup with Leto, but he's never quite there. But we'll get a little bit of a chapter with a good look at him and Paul next time. Thanks very much for that, Joseph. I much appreciate it. Yeah. So here we go. The epigraph starts off, and just to point out that our epigraph is from a dictionary of Muad'Dib. So the emphasis there is on diction. And it's really, I suppose, in reference to the background of the Dune universe, the historical records, etc., always written by Irulan. They come from a range of different types of books. So this one's just letting us know how to know to pronounce Wellington Yueh, basically. And we get a little bit of information on him. I'll just read this epigraph out to get us started. So we have standard 10082 to 10,191. And we're told that he's a medical doctor of the Suk School, and he graduated in the standard 10112, married to Wanna Marcus, BG for Bene Gesserit, standard 10,092 to 10,186, and there's a question mark next to the date of her death. Chiefly noted as betrayer of Duke Leto Atreides, cross-reference bibliography Appendix 7, Imperial Conditioning, and Betrayal the. So, which is quite interesting. From the Dictionary of Muad'Dib by Princess Irulan. So we get a whole pile of little bits of info here just within just within the epigraph at the start. And it gives us all sorts of little questions to answer or to ask. And there are a few little, if we do pay attention to the details, there's a couple of little questions that we'll find out, I suppose, or might intrigue us. There's Chaya saying, Shalom all. Shalom, Chaya. Thanks for joining us. And Joseph saying, thanks for doing the book club. I appreciate it. You're more than welcome, folks. I'm enjoying it. As I said, if you do have any questions or comments, fire away. We're just going to pick through it. And I kind of like that sort of sense of looking at the details. As I said, a set of books that we've looked at many, many times over the years. But I said I think there's always a different way of looking at them. So I'm certainly looking at them from a different point of view this time. And hopefully it's not too anal, folks. Excuse me. But as I like to point out, I think Frank's put an awful lot of work into this, and just where he gets different things from, you know. So we find out that we have Doctor Wellington Yueh, and we've got the death date as 10,191, and a lot of the action within Dune takes place in that year. Um, we find out, I suppose, that, as I said, it's given a year for Juana Marcus's death, which is 10,186, which is 5 years before the action in the book starts. But there's a question mark next to it. We're told he's the betrayer of Leto Atreides, which we already know from our look at the Baron and his insidious plan and so on. Excuse me. And also that he has a, if we pay attention, the little BG there, he's got a Bene Gesserit wife. And one of Marcus is, I suppose, quite important to the plot. I've just again another Bene Gesserit there with a kind of Roman name. I've made a wee note there. Marcus would have been quite a common name in the Roman Empire. I suppose it's another inversion within gender, though in this case it's a surname. So Marcus, in that sense, would be associate with anybody born in March. I suppose that kind of name, associate with God Mars. That's what I would take with it. So just one of those little things about meaning there. But yeah, let me just see. So the first thing we really see as we get our little epigraph, it's setting us up. And as I said, we know that Yueh's the betrayer. And we were told in the previous chapter, which was the epigraph in the previous chapter, which I think was, let me just quickly check. Oh yeah, wasn't it? It was from a child's book, Child's History of Muad'Dib, and Wellington Yueh was described in that as black in treachery, bright in knowledge. So for the last few chapters, we've been getting a bit of a setup with Yueh, but we have this foreknowledge that obviously apart from the Barons and his cadre of characters, I suppose, know about, but the Atreides don't. And the first thing that we notice about Paul, I suppose we'll quickly have a wee look at the Doctor. We get an introduction to him. But I suppose, yeah, sorry, I've gone a wee bit all over the place. But the first thing, I suppose, whenever he does, he comes into the room, we have a lot of these introductions like this where we get a description of a person, how they enter the room, kind of is a little bit of a setup for these characters, and we can compare and contrast them a wee bit here. So Paul, again, Paul hears Dr. Yueh entering the training room, noting the stiff deliberation of the man's pace. But what we do notice about Paul here is he's not really paid much attention to Thufir's lesson from the last chapter. Not only is he not sitting paying attention to what's coming through the door into the room, but he's actually very relaxed here. So and it's interesting that Paul's actually prone here whenever Yueh comes in. Paul's stretched out and face down, and he's recently just had a massage after his fight with Gurney, and he's completely relaxed. And so the interesting thing from my point of view, I suppose, is that whenever Yueh does enter the room, it's to do with Paul's level of trust. That Paul's completely relaxed. How is it he's described as here? Is it? He felt deliciously relaxed. That's the word we were looking for. Deliciously relaxed. And I suppose it's maybe, again, we have this bit of Paul, I suppose, in some ways is still probably a typical teenage boy at this point. And of course, Yueh notes how relaxed he is. He looked comfortable. But the interesting thing is that Yueh is actually the real threat here. And we know this, don't we? At this point. Excuse me. So it lends to a certain sense of tension within the story, but it's a tension that's sort of the reader's bringing that tension. I suppose we as a reader now have foreknowledge, and I suppose from this point on, it's kind of, oh no, what's going on? Is he not going to notice this kind of thing? We're well aware. Is Paul not going to see? And oh goodness, our doggies are going nuts there. And in that sense, I suppose, as I said, it lends to a certain sense of tension within the narrative, and I think it puts the reader a wee bit on edge, if you like. And we're wondering, is Paul going to figure this out, or is it going to be too late? Is everything that we're being told in this sense of history, is it really going to happen this way? And how are we going to see these things played out? Joseph says the Harkonnen had wanted for 5 years, and the sisterhood did nothing. Didn't even tell Jessica her doctor's wife was taken. Irulan wrote after the betrayal, not sure when, don't know when one was taken or killed. Yeah, so first of all, and always remember, I think we're going to come to it in a bit whenever we get to Leto, etc. But there's one thing you've got to remember. So in this point, I suppose if we've read the books already, we should know this. But the Atreides are masters of propaganda. They're better at it than anyone. And at the point where Irulan would be writing these books, she'd be part of the court of Muad'Dib, or even after that, possibly part of Leto's early court, Leto II. But yeah, we're getting books written from a future that are describing the events as we look at it as a history. And and again, it's I suppose the question of it's when is the book being presented from? So yeah, we get little tidbits here. I think the tension, as I said, Herbert actually kind of openly talks about tension. I think in the previous chapter we were talking about Paul discussing is that really what your lesson's about? Tension, such a basic lesson, I suppose. We've also discussed that basically all the way as we continually going, we're getting lessons, as if Paul, in the same way that Paul's getting lessons. Excuse me. And it's just a continual thing. We're being educated in the universe, in Arrakis, in the politics, and all of these different things, all of the intrigues, and our knowledge about this world is building up. And this is Frank's mythopoeia. This is his art of world building, if you like. And it's starting to, we're getting a real sense of things here. Certainly within, the organization of the dramatis personae, if you like. We're starting to get to see the characters. We're dealing with them one or two at a time, getting a sense of who they are. And they're often, compares and contrasts of light and darkness, this kind of thing. So the next time, I suppose at this point, what we're going to have a wee look at, we get a good bit of description about Doctor Yueh as he comes in and starts to interact with Paul. And arguably, it's a level of description that we don't get with any of the other characters. We get an awful lot about this guy. And we get it from Paul's point of view. He starts off by saying that Paul looks comfortable. And we're told he has a calm, high-pitched voice. And at this point, Paul raises his head from his relaxed position to give the man a kind of glance, if you like. And from that, we learn basically quite a lot about Yueh. So we're told that he has, and in addition to what we've already been told about how he entered the room with his stiff deliberation of the man's pace, he's a stick-like figure. So we're assuming he's quite thin and sort of straight. He wears wrinkled black clothing and has a square block of a head. His lips are purple, and he has drooping mustaches with a diamond tattoo, which is on his forehead, which is the mark of imperial conditioning. He has long black hair caught in a Sook School's silver ring at his left shoulder. And the left-hand side, I suppose we were talking about things like, representations of Sinister and Dexter, left and right, this kind of thing. And yeah, so he's from one of the Sook Schools. And we also had a wee look the last time that this imperial conditioning is essentially some kind of conditioning. We're not told quite what. But it's called imperial conditioning because these people are considered to be safe and secure to the point where they're safe to administer to the emperor, if you like. Chaya Rivka says, Manual of Muad'Dib Family Commentaries, A Child's History of Muad'Dib, Dictionary of Muad'Dib. Irulan is busy and we're only in the 5th chapter. Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of these things that gives a real sense of, I suppose, what we call verisimilitude to the work. There's a sense of reality that not only are we getting various aspects to this world. We're getting, the political. We're getting the, I suppose, the military, the economic. We're getting a bit of the ecological. But this is the historical and the literary as well. And I suppose there's going to be, as we go through the Dune universe and through all the books, we're going to get quite a range of different books and works, all that exist within that universe. Mm. And they give it, as I said, they give it a sense of reality. And Tolkien does this as well with his world, I suppose, in Middle Earth. Outside of the narrative, it's the bulk of the languages and the history of Middle Earth that kind of really frame it. And then within the story of the Lord of the Rings itself, the characters are often making reference to myths or histories within their own world, and that are well fleshed out. Excuse me. From the epigraph, Yueh is 109 years old. Not much mention of his advanced age in this passage. He'll say that he's an old man as he's attempting to manipulate Paul, and yeah, longevity, we have to assume, is a thing that goes with melanges. Because it is a geriatric drug, so that's possibly why. But he certainly describes himself as old, though we've not really seen him portrayed that way, have we? So yeah, again, it's I suppose, don't we have? I think at some point, I think we'll hit a description of the Emperor, and I think the Emperor is in his 70s, but only looks. I think he looks like he's in his late 20s to early 30s, that kind of thing. Yes, indeed. So I've just made a wee note. It's an awful lot of detail about this character and in the description, and as I said, more so than any of the others that we've really had so far. Now, I've said we've had a wee chat about the imperial conditioning before as well. So he's in to present a bit of good news for Paul, and sorry, just patting this book down here so it will not fly up. There we go. And I suppose the good news comes in two parts, really. There's no lessons for today, which is a bit of a no-no. It's there actually will be lessons in a way, and also that his father will be along presently. So we're constantly, looking out for Leto. Is my dad coming? This kind of thing, and we're getting this. He'll be along soon, kind of thing. Excuse me. And it's a way. I actually thought in this case, Yueh kind of knows how to sort of poke at Paul a wee bit here, and I think invoking his father's name is, I'd say it's a common trait within Paul. Evoking his father's name is a way of getting his interest. All of a sudden, getting him, is my father coming? This kind of thing gets his attention, and it works here, and it gets Paul to sit up, and we have a wee bit of a chat about traveling to Arrakis, and that Doctor Yueh is arranging for Paul to have a film book viewer with several lessons during the crossing. And this little scene, as I said, we're in the same room as before, by the way. Excuse me. Paul starts to get dressed, etc. And let me just catch my little point here. Sorry, folks, just lost my place there. And I said, yeah, the point about Paul getting excited, I'm going to get to see my father. They get to spend so little time together. And the words that we use here, that are used here, the Emperor's command to take over the fief of Arrakis. So we're still in the training room from before, and we still have the sort of same framing of scene that we've been talking about that Herbert uses and then reuses. It gives us a bit of familiarity with the characters to see them in the same setting again. So they come over to the table, and we start getting a bit of Yueh's internal monologue here. Let's see. So straight away, let's just have a wee read at it. How the boy has filled out these past few months. Such a waste. Oh, such a sad waste. And he reminded himself, I must not falter. What I do is done to be certain my Wana no longer can be hurt by the Harkonnen beasts. And so a little bit of whatever's going on, he has, and we know he's obviously going to betray this young man or cause him harm in some way. We get a bit of a sense of whatever Yueh's up to, this villain, is that he's doing it for somebody. He's doing it, and of course, if we look at the epigraph, he's doing it for his wife. And we have to assume, from the information that we get there, that she's been murdered, and been murdered by the Harkonnens. And excuse me, the Harkonnen beasts. That should start us getting to ask a few questions, I suppose, and it should allow us to play for a few sympathies with Doctor Yueh, and think that maybe there's more to it. But at the same time, he's telling himself, I must not falter. I've got to go through with this. So we're getting hopefully a bit of his motivations revealed as a character. Though we're still not too certain of the nature of what he's about. But he's obviously in a position that if this is the traitor, this is the person who's going to bring about the fall of House Atreides, he's obviously in a position where he can get very, very close to Paul. And that there must be a level of trust there. And I've just made a wee note here. Excuse me. Paul joins him at the table and he's getting dressed, buttoning his jacket. And what will I be studying on the way across? This little engagement, but they're right there. And as I said, Paul's getting dressed, and it's just in terms of how Paul behaves with Yueh that I would suggest that there's a level of trust here with Dr. Yueh. And I think it's a good contrast to the doubt he has in Gurney previously. Just that moment of, oh no, is it Gurney? Is Gurney going to turn on me? And I think the whole point of that exercise within the previous chapter is to really set up that Gurney can be trusted. And the opportunity for Gurney to kill Paul is right there. And Paul realizes it briefly, but it doesn't happen. And I think we get the gist that if Gurney wanted Paul dead, Paul would be dead. So coming out of that previous encounter just before Yueh's arrived, we have the fact that I would suggest that Paul's kind of learned to trust Gurney afresh to the point where he's almost been upset with himself, though that sense of trust may have carried on here. But I get the sense that there's already an existing trust for Yueh. And we'll see a sort of little bit of interaction between the two. So again, our lessons go from this kind of, what lessons are we going to learn? As Joseph just said, I wonder if Irulan started her books very shortly after marrying Muad'Dib. Well, she's not. Yeah, most likely, I would think. That's going to be her. It's the thing that will keep her occupied, and we'll kind of run with that as we follow the plot. Actually, but it'll be her main role. And of course, the interesting thing is we'll get that reiteration of Irulan as the historian when it comes to Farad'n and Leto II, and that Farad'n's going to be his historian, isn't he? So, excuse me, what lessons will I be learning on the journey? And as I said, no lessons, but we get a lesson anyway. And let me just find my wee point. So, yes, we get this little stutter almost from Yueh, which I think is interesting. And then we're told that the lesson, we're going to be studying the tyrannic life forms of Arrakis. And that's basically, just to let you know again, so for anybody who's not familiar with tyrannic, to do with terra. So terra is the Latin name for the earth, basically. This is a primordial deity within the Roman religions, I suppose, would be Terra Mater, which is your Mother Earth. And is, let me see, how also Tellus, I believe, is the other term. So that. Let me see. Terra Mater would be the equivalent. The Greek equivalent would be Gaia, and so of course we have things like Mediterranean. Things like that. So Tyrannic life forms on Arrakis is specifically referring to life forms from the planet Earth that have survived on Arrakis. It's one of those. It's one of those kind of sci-fi things, I suppose. The term Terra is quite popular in science fiction, as is Gaia. But there we go. I wonder how much spice you ingested daily in order to live that long before they moved to Arrakis. I think that's the thing, Joseph. I think that spice, if you understand that spice is everywhere on Arrakis, etc., but it's the universal commodity. Everybody wants a bit of spice, and it's the thing that's worth the most, I suppose. In terms of being a universal, I suppose it's an anti-agapic, isn't it? It's a geriatric drug. So I'd imagine the main thing about a spice addiction is as long as you keep taking the stuff, you're fine, and you'll probably live quite a long time. And it's only to the point if you're on Arrakis where it's saturation, where because it's in everything, it's just literally your blood, everything about you's filled with the stuff. That's I think where you get the eyes of Ibad and stuff like that. So I think you have to be pretty hardcore on your melange use to kind of have that kind of or be a resident on Arrakis for a reasonably long time, for your eyes to change, etc. But for the longevity, that's one of the effects of taking melange. I suppose you could argue it's maybe something like taking an aspirin every day in some ways, but the point is, I suppose, if you live to about 120 or something like that, if you do withdraw, then you're probably going to So it's the properties of melange are quite wide. I think we get different references to it, different things, and it's a ubiquitous drug. That as much as the one thing we do learn about it later on, I think, is that as much as there are lots of different drugs within the Dune universe, excuse me, you can use melange in place of them, I think. But for example, I'm just trying to think of the truth sayer drug. Bear with me a wee second. Truth sayer, truth trance, semi-hypnotic trance induced by one of several awareness spectrum narcotics, in which the petite betrayals of deliberate falsehood are apparent to the truth trance observer. Note, awareness spectrum narcotics are frequently fatal, except to desensitized individuals capable of transforming the poisonous configuration within their own bodies. Now, my understanding is that if you use a particular drug for an ability within the Dune universe, that melange can sometimes be substituted. But if that's the case, then the original drug ceases to work. So there's lots of, and I think that's something that might be worth looking at as we go through this, and we can actually try and note down all the different details and properties of melange, and just the little subtle things that we can find. Melange is expensive as House Atreides rich enough to support. Oh, sorry, I missed a couple of comments there. Let me see. Sorry, Babs was saying aging is a disease for which melange is the treatment, or words like that. I said that's the thing about melange. I've pointed out a couple of times for anybody who's read Vril, The Coming Race, or listened to an audiobook tape, etc., will kind of get this if you look at how Vril is used by the Vril-Ya, the lizard people, if you like, in their society, is that it's another, I call it a ubiquitous drug. So it can be used in lots of different ways, including as a fuel source and as a weapon as well, I think. I think melange has lots of different uses. But yeah, it's definitely something worth investigating as we go. And expensive is how much House Atreides is rich enough to support spice consumption for many of the staff. Remember the discussion between Baron and Piter regarding the cost of Piter's habit. Yes, indeed. Yeah. So is it a thing for the rich? Again, are the average Joes within the Pfeiffer-like system taking melange, or is there within this kind of feudal society, is there an absolute separation where it is so expensive that it's probably out of the range of most people's I suppose financial purview? But we also have smugglers. So as much as there is the one thing we do know is, as much as there's the whole chome thing, that there is a black market as well, and it seems to involve members of chome as well, like the emperor's household. So, but you would have to assume, I don't know, that hmm, I think arguably it's quite a dangerous drug to take. But yeah, we'll have to have a nosy as we go. He's also a doctor, best training in the Imperium. How old is Boheme? That's a good question. Ah, it's a pity because we do have a few wee kind of at the back of the book, and it's Appendix 4 is this almanac on Ashraf, which is selected excerpts of the noble houses, and it just gives us a few, I suppose, a few of the main characters. We get, as I said, excerpts of the noble houses: Shaddam the Fourth, Leto Atreides, Lady Jessica, Lady Alia, Vladimir Harkonnen, Count Hazimir Fenring, and Count Glossu Ravan. So we get a sense of some people's dates, etc. But there's a lot of characters that, I think arguably a few more characters could have been a bit more interesting. But I suppose it's really the Emperor and the major ones of House Atreides and House Harkonnen. But yeah, something that's it's a pity it wasn't expanded, I suppose. And yeah, I suppose, So if melange is this, and it's only produced in one place on the universe, this very scarce commodity, it really does make us actually wonder how common its use is. And I suppose we also understand that certain groups would want to stockpile it as well because of their dependency on it. So yeah, we don't really get much more about that, but that will become quite interesting, I suppose. About there are certain tyrannic life forms that are on Arrakis, and we'll as we go through this little thread, I suppose, the way Yueh speaks, the way he puts it, is he says that the planet has opened its arms to certain life forms from Earth. And the interesting thing is, he's not sure how. And this is the point where I suppose he says, I must seek out Dr. Kynes. And I've made a wee note here because I wrote down Leto Kynes. But at this point, he just calls him Dr. Kynes. And I must seek out the planetary ecologist when we arrive, a Dr. Kynes, and offer my help in the investigation. So it's a quite interesting little point. It tells us a few things. It tells us there's a planetary ecologist, and that it's Dr. Kynes. Of course, one of the funny things in the book, I think, that's quite daft is the whole who is the Leto Kynes and Dr. Leto Kynes, and who is Leto Kynes a different, or is Leto a different person than Dr. Kynes, this kind of thing. And it's almost to the point of it's almost kind of a Superman and Clark Kent kind of thing. Aha, Clark Kent, that kind of thing. It's a very obvious mystery, I think. And yeah, so we're not going to meet Leto Kynes yet, but we learn about this planetary ecologist. That should be of interest to us. Again, if we all remember that the dedication at the start of the book is to dry land ecologists. Excuse me. And yeah, absolutely something of note. And it also tells us a wee bit, guys. I think if you think about it, it tells us about maybe a little bit about how would we put it? Yuri's real character, I would say, kind of what he would naturally be like prior to what's happened to his wife and the Harkonnens getting their claws into him. That you can get a sense that he would be kind of intellectually curious and want to help and lend his expertise. Again, the little epigraph prior to this one, told us that he was black in treachery but bright in knowledge. So, and I think we get a wee bit of insight into his mind here. I think he has got quite a quick mind, Yueh, but he's obviously he's obviously a bit he's lost the plot a wee bit. I think, but we do get a fair few of his thoughts in this chapter, and yeah, I suppose he sort of berates himself for this, doesn't he? Let me see. It's almost all the excitement of investigating this planet is almost sort of overrides his sense of betrayal and desire to take revenge against the Harkonnens. Excuse me. And of course, yeah, he's berating himself. What am I saying? I play the hypocrite even to myself, And yeah, there's a fair bit of I suppose self-admonishment, I suppose, from Yueh, but he's trying to sort of gird himself to do the dirt, to do the deed, I suppose. So he sees himself as a hypocrite, and genuinely, I think that's a little bit of just his genuine natural curiosity. I suppose that the undamaged side of Doctor Yueh coming out for a wee moment, I think, and letting his professional curiosity and joy in what he does get the better of him. It's almost, I can't wait to have a look at this. I wonder if Dr. Kynes needs help. This should be interesting, And at that point, it's just nice. You fool! Don't be. What are you thinking? And so we get a little observation at this point. Paul asks a question. Have you got any film book stuff on the Fremen? And Yueh's distracted, and it allows Paul to observe him a little bit. And Paul doesn't really get it's kind of Fremen, huh? He's kind of not there for a moment. Excuse me. And he ends up drumming his fingers nervously, and has a certain amount of awareness, I suppose, that he catches Paul observing this, and he withdraws his hand. And I think, again, a little bit of a curious thing. And Paul sort of changes the question, I suppose, hasn't got a response from the Fremen, so instead sort of shifts it to, I suppose, something on the whole Arrakeen population. He makes it a general question in the same area. And of course, it gets Yueh out of his thoughts, and we get another wee lesson. And we're told that, and we've already heard this one, I suppose, but we've been told that people live in different places in Arrakis. But again, probably a wee bit of reinforcement on this one. We're told that there are two separations of people on Arrakis, and this, I suppose, group one is the Fremen, and we're told that the second group would be the people of the Graben, the Sink, and the Pan. And I suppose a little bit about the different aspects of the Fremen and the indigenous peoples, but we're told that there is some intermarriage, and quite interestingly, I thought that the women of Pan and Sink prefer Fremen husbands, and the men prefer Fremen wives. So just generally, everybody prefers a Fremen companion within the people of the Pan, Grabens, and Sinks, I suppose. And from this, we get a little Fremen saying, or a little bit of first bit of planetary or ecological wisdom in relation to Arrakis. And this is a Fremen saying. So polish comes from the cities, and wisdom comes from the desert. If I'm probably paraphrasing this, I should have just quoted it. Where are we? But 17. They have a saying: polish comes from the cities, wisdom from the desert. And of course, Paul asks, have you any pictures? We don't see any, but Dr. Yueh says he'll see what he can do. And we have another mention about the most interesting thing about them, he says, is their eyes. And they're totally blue with no whites. And again, we've been having a look at a lot of characters' eyes, etc. here, but this is we're being told that this is I suppose a particular particular feature of this group. So it's not an individual's eyes we're looking at this point, but it prompts Paul to ask the question: okay, what's with the blue eyes? Is it mutation? And of course, this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. So, Doctor Yueh is a medical doctor. We're getting a medical answer, if you like. No, it's not mutation. It's very matter of fact. And we're told, of course, that this is linked to the saturation of your blood with the drug melange. And again, interestingly enough, Paul makes, I suppose, what you would call a value judgment. Paul thinks that the Fremen must be brave to live at the edge of the desert. And at this point, I suppose, in terms of what he's saying here, if we think back to the previous chapter, we had a lesson from the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohim, and it was all about what makes what a leader needs to rule, what makes an effective leader. And we had 4 things, but this is one of them, in a sense. And Paul's making a judgment about the Fremen that they must be brave. The thing was that one of the things that a ruler truly needs to rule is the valor of the brave. And so there's a wee bit of, again, we're getting these wee associations with discussions that we've had in previous chapters within the little lessons. So this is one of the 4 things, as I said, that are needed to rule. And Yueh says, by all accounts, in other words, which is an affirmation. Yes, they are brave. They must be. And we get a little bit more info on the Fremen. So we're getting more and more built up about them. And this is quite good. I suppose that they sound pretty interesting from this point of view. But we're told that they compose poems to their knives, that their women are as fierce as the men, and that we're told their children are violent and dangerous. And that's that's okay. That sounds like a unusual society, that they write poems to their knives, to their weapons. Okay, that makes sense. Their women are as fierce as the men, yeah. The children are violent and dangerous. And I think what's a real, and I think that again, from we're getting Paul's lessons, I suppose, or our lessons here. That they sound, as the word I would use, they sound interesting, don't they? They don't necessarily sound friendly, but they certainly sound interesting. And I think what comes next for Paul is a real sort of almost a real slap in the face. Not intentionally, I think, but maybe it is. Even Fremen children are violent and dangerous, but the thing that I think is really upsetting to Paul here, you'll not be permitted to mingle with them, I dare say. And it's one of these, Paul just stares, and again, it's this staring motif, if you like, this recurring thing with staring, not happy at all, stares at Yueh, finding in these few glimpses of the Fremen a power of words that caught his entire attention. What a people to win as allies. And this is a little bit of Paul's internal monologue here. And I don't know if I just get the sense that he's staring at Yueh with contempt there. And it's either contempt or it sounds, maybe from Paul's point of view, a little bit of, oh no, not more of this nonsense. I'm not allowed to engage with people here outside of my own class and my own, I'm not allowed to play with anybody my own age. And I'm just I think he's just being told more of the same. You won't be allowed to do this. You won't be allowed to engage with these people. And I think it just solicits a penetrating stare from Paul. And again, I suppose it just gives us a sense that he's not altogether happy. I suppose it's something. But rather than sort of dwelling on that, the focus is on the power of words, and his mind is to win them as allies would suggest that it's not a childish response that Paul has here, as much as he is staring at Doctor Yueh. But what are people to win as allies? He's thinking ahead, and he's thinking strategically. And I suppose he's thinking as as we were told earlier, to remember that Paul is the son of a duke, and he's being trained to run his own house. So it's an interesting little exchange. And of course, he shifts the subject. What about the worms? What else are we going to learn? And again, Yueh's what? Again, he's not quite there. He's off balance with Paul here, I think, and probably preoccupied with his forthcoming betrayal. So again, we've had a little bit about the Fremen. What about the worms? I'd like to study the worms in my film book. And again, we get this little stutter that comes out of Yueh to begin with. To be sure, very Irish thing to say. And we're told he has a film book on a small specimen, only 110 meters long, 22 meters in diameter, and that it was taken in the northern latitudes. Worms of more than 400 meters in length have been recorded by reliable witnesses, and there's reason to believe even larger ones exist. So we're getting a little bit more on the worms here too. And as I said, yeah, it's the second time we've got this stuttered response from Yueh. I always think we should remember, I suppose, from Paul's point of view, that Paul has been trained in the minutiae of Bene Gesserit observation. He's been trained in the way, as we've been told in the last couple of chapters. So, this is all we get. All this, and we're told a little bit about the northern latitudes, etc. And essentially, we get a couple of little terms here as well. So the first one is in terms of technology of the Imperium. If you like, we're talking about film books here. Excuse me. And there is an entry on them in the terminology of the Imperium at the back of the book. And we're told that film books are any Shigawire imprint used in training and carrying a mnemonic pulse. Excuse me a wee second. Oh, thank you. Sorry, doggies coming in and opening doors and stuff as they do. Sorry, any Shigawire imprint used in training and carrying a mnemonic pulse. And the other thing that we can quickly look up is that Shigawire has an entry there, and we're told it's a metallic extrusion of a ground vine, Narvi narvium. So some kind of metallic plant. And it's grown only on Seleucia secundus and 3 delta casein. We're told also that we should note it has extreme tensile strength. So Shigawire is quite an interesting thing in the Dune universe and has a few different uses. But in this case, it's letting us know that it's made for very, very small film books. And bear with me a wee second. Yeah, and very quickly, just prior to that, I jumped ahead of a wee thing. We're also told that they're having a wee look at the conical projection chart of the northern Arrakeen latitude spread on the table. The desert belt and south polar regions are marked uninhabitable. Is it the worms and the storms? So having a wee sort of question about that. And also, by the way, very happily, that we can have a wee quick look at the map at the front of the book and take a wee nosy at that, if we're ever happy to do so. I think it's not a brilliant map. I have to say the map of Arrakis. It's one of those things that fantasy and science fiction books, particularly fantasy books, like to do good maps, don't they? And it's a thing you'll find in quite a lot of historical books as well. But yeah, it's not an outstanding map as maps go. But we do have, yeah. So we're told that the lesson here, I suppose, that we get, there's a couple of wee things, and I wanted to point out one of them, and I wasn't too sure about this. Maybe you can get your thoughts on this, guys. What was the thing that we're told that the map shows the projection for the northern Arrakeen latitudes? And we also got the city called Arrakeen. And I was wondering about the pronunciation of that, and I've always gone Arrakeen. But then thinking that when the word's used as an adjective, that would it be Arakian? But it's interesting. So I was just wondering about that. I just thought it was an odd note that the city's name is Arrakeen, but the word Arrakeen is also used as an adjective in relation to the planet as well, I suppose. The Arrakis deserts, the Arrakis mountains, this kind of thing. And I was just wondering about the pronunciation of it. But I suppose the lesson here that we get on top of this is that the desert belt and the South Polar regions are marked uninhabitable. And of course, Paul's wanting to know, is it the worms? And yes, this is an unspoken yes, but for the reason the worms are one thing, but the storms as well. And this prompts a really, I suppose, an interesting little question before we get to Doctor Yueh's gift. And I suppose the question is, well, it's not really a question, isn't it? Let me see. Let me just check. 28. Where are we? Yeah, it's not. Yeah, Paul says this, but any place can be made habitable. And of course, Yueh's response is, this is the case. It can be made habitable, providing it's economically feasible. And he tells us that Arrakis has many costly perils. So it's a wee mention that I suppose as much as the start to the Dune that we've had so far, it kind of has almost a kind of gothic kind of fantasy feel to it. But there is a technological level within the book, and so that it kind of gives us a sense of, as much as this is this kind of seems like a bit of a medieval feudal world, that technologies such as terraforming are considered not a bother. I suppose that's what Paul's talking about here. Why, we can change planets. So it's just an interesting thing in terms of what I suppose what people are capable of in this universe. So we're about to get Dr. Yueh's gift. I suppose the other wee thing I noticed there, I made a point of, is that again he's making a note of how cautious Paul is. It's another word that we're always associating with Paul. Excuse me. So as we get to Dr. Yueh's gift, he smooths his mustaches, reiterates, and again he's kind of knows how to play Paul's mood a wee bit by mentioning his father. Gets him in an interested, good kind of state of mind. So he reiterates that his father will be along shortly, and tells him that he has a gift for Paul. But let's see. Yeah, he puts, and again, this little thing's framed for us by Herbert here. He put an object on the table between them. Black, oblong, no larger than the end of Paul's thumb. This little thing. And of course, this is Dr. Yueh's gift to Paul, which I think it's a really important gift. And one of those things that I suppose, as we look at Yueh's character and how people think of Yueh throughout the Dune series, but I think it's quite an important wee thing. This Paul looks, but he doesn't touch. And again, this is where Yueh notes his caution. And it's again, I've put a wee question here myself, guys. Let's see what you think. But it's about trust, and it's a sense that I get the sense here that Paul trusts Yueh, okay, but here's an object, and I suppose we get this idea of poisons, wars of assassins, and all of this kind of stuff, and it's almost that there's a distrust of the object at the very least. That almost the caution should be Paul's default place, that he should eye things with suspicion and not approach. But it's just, again, I suppose that from this point of view, it's Yueh observing this about Paul's character and not the other way around. But what we're told is that this is a very old orange Catholic Bible. And I suppose the details of this book in particular are that it was made for space travelers. It's not a film book like the ones we've been told about that are made from sugar wire. In fact, that it's printed on filament, has its own magnifier, and uses an electrostatic charge system. Sounds like a fantastic wee ebook, doesn't it? So, in fact, I'll tell you what, I'll just read it to you, actually, because I just said here, read how it works from the book. So it's there we go. It's a very old Orange Catholic Bible made for space travelers, not a film book, but actually printed on filament paper. It has its own magnifier and electrostatic charge system. He picked it up, demonstrated. The book is held closed by the charge, which forces against spring-locked covers. You press the edge thus, and the pages you've selected repel each other, and the book opens. And of course, Paul says it's so small, and we're told a little bit more about it. But it has 1,800 pages, and you press the edge thus and so, and the charge moves ahead one page at a time as you read. Never touch the actual pages with your fingers. The filament tissue is too delicate. And of course, he hands it to Paul to try. So it sounds like a fascinating little thing. If once upon a time, I actually used to have a small, very small Bible, long time ago, and I just bought it because it was a turn of the. I think it was a Victorian one, and I picked it up on a second-hand bookshop. And I like tiny books, so I always thought that was quite an impressive thing. About the Dune universe, but there's these little books. I suppose we have ebooks and stuff like that these days, but this concept of a film book back in 1963, 1965, I think it's pretty interesting. But the description of how they work is very detailed, and I think it shows you a kind of good science fiction mind at work, if you like. But yeah, and of course. This is an Orange Catholic Bible, and we had a wee bit of a chat about that as well. We will have a wee look into it, I think, in detail, but I think we've already encountered it. And just to read you the wee bit in the back. So the Orange Catholic Bible is the accumulated book, the religious text produced by the Commission of Ecumenical Translators, the CET. Excuse me. It contains elements of most ancient religions, including the Mammoth Sari, the Mahayana Christianity, Zen Sunni Catholicism, and Buddhist-Islamic traditions. Its supreme commandment is considered to be, "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul." And there's a wee bit more on that within one of the appendixes on the religion of Dune. But we're going to hit the appendixes as we finish the end of the book and have a look at them in detail. So the Orange Catholic Bible, again, this kind of mishmash of all, pretty much almost all it tells us of the world's major religions, even though there's a few there that are clearly hybrids. And so this gift from Dr. Yueh is a Bible. A Bible is a collection of books. It's a library as well, by the way. So, yeah, and I think the little thing about how he describes how the book opens and which works against the spring lock covers. That the book holds this charge that works against the spring lock covers. This is another kind of little motif of tension that keeps appearing within the story. And I think it's quite interesting the way that's what keeps the book closed. Ah, dear. So of course, at this point, we get an explanation. Paul's been wary of this device, but we get an explanation. And I suppose it's all about it's never touched the actual pages. If you see, he closes the book and hands it to Paul. Try it. So Paul takes it basically and accepts it. So certainly, if it was coated in poison or anything like that, that could have been a bad thing for Paul. So there's aspects of Paul's trust here, I suppose, which we should consider. Let's just see. I've got any comments there. Cynthia's in the Baron focused on the caramel-like texture of the middle latitudes. Paul's attention goes to the liminal areas, the edge of the desert and the deep uninhabitable areas. That's a very good point. Yeah, I suppose you're right. The Barons focus on the map of Arrakis. That's an excellent point, Cynthia. Is on where all the spice is, etc. Isn't it? It's the main mineable areas that can be mined. But Paul's focus is more on the mysteries, isn't it? The mysteries of Arrakis. And of course, Thufir's already told them, let him in on something that his father knows, is that they think there are an awful lot of the Fremen here, not just a few. Yeah, excellent point. Yeah. So this Orange Catholic Bible, and again we get a little bit of internal monologue from Yueh, and he, as he watches Paul operate it, I salve my own conscience. I give him the surcease of religion before betraying him. Thus may I say to myself that he is gone where I cannot go. And I think this little internal monologue of Doctor Yueh is really interesting right here. What's he sort of saying here? I think it's really interesting. What does he mean? Let's just have a wee. I salve my own conscience. So he's trying to sort of, give himself a bit of relief, I suppose. But by giving Paul, I think this. He calls it the surcease of religion. I suppose. Before his betrayal. Thus, this is the trick. Thus may I say to myself, he has gone where I cannot. So what he's kind of saying is I'm doing something good for the kid here, because I feel bad. I feel bad about betraying him. So I'm doing something for my own consciousness, something that'll make me feel a bit better about it. And what I'm doing is I'm going to give him this Bible, and through this, he will get something that I cannot have. He'll have and I suppose what it surcease would be, to consolate, to be consoled by, to take relief in something. So when he offers Paul this surcease of religion, the comfort of religion, if you like, that he'll have that comfort for when I betray him. And it's quite a weird thing to sort of go, well, and therefore my conscience will be a little bit better. But and he also says, thus may I say to myself. Let me just find it. Just read it exactly. 29. There we go. Thus may I say to myself that he has gone where I cannot go. And I thought that's a really interesting turn of phrase here. And I don't know what you guys think, but our epigraph at the start is written by Irulan. And one of the questions that I like to ask is who is there an actual narrator up outside of, say, Frank Herbert, the author, in terms of referring to the third person omniscient narrator that we have? And it's simply that because inside Yueh's own thoughts here, I thought that was very religious sounding, and it fits in with the tone of this chapter. I think we're getting this kind of religious introduction. And I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. You have to remember that we as readers can hear his internal monologue. So as much as he's saying these things to himself, we're actually party to his thoughts. And I just thought, what does he mean by that last bit? He's gone where I cannot. And I just, how do we think? Is it that religion, that I can't get relief, I can't get any consolation from this? Is it that kind of thing that he can have salvation, I cannot? That he can find God, I cannot, because for whatever reasons he doesn't have it. If you see what I mean. And I said, it beggars a question of what does he really mean by this? And I suppose we could all interpret this differently. I was just curious to see what you guys think. But he, so and yeah, it does. There is a kind of religious aspect to Doctor Yueh, almost as much as he can be considered a villain, if you like. He is the set of conditions that pave the way for Paul, if you like, and in particular this gift of the Bible. It will have an effect on Paul, and it will have an influence on him. So it's just that religious tone, and as much as we get the epigraphs, and then we get this section of action that we can see within the book, and then another epigraph. it could make us ask questions about, what is it that we're actually reading? Is it, or is it the piece of the story of Muad'Dib being pieced together from different sources? But I just thought it wasn't. The tone seemed odd there. Or does it? Does he? And I don't think he has any religious aspect to what he's doing. I think he's out for revenge. I think. Um, so we get a little bit more about this Bible in particular. Paul's noting, with the fact that the filament tissue is too delicate, that it's not made of sugar wire, that it must have been made before film books. And Doctor Yueh says, yes, indeed, it's quite old. And then we get, let it be our secret. Your parents might think it too valuable for one so young. So, the book's quite old, too valuable for one so young, and we get again a little run with Doctor Yueh's thoughts here, and it's a concern, I think, at this point for being caught. And Yueh thought his mother would surely wonder at my motives. Why give this kid such an expensive, such a rare book? What's the meaning behind it? I think it suggests he's very wary of Jessica's scrutiny at this point. And I said, Paul continues to be cautious, I think. And it's he's being handed the equivalent of something very, very, a very expensive antique, I suppose. And again, that if it's so valuable, and this is part of, I think we're going to see the psychology of Yueh here, that he is baiting and trapping Paul for some reason. Well, there's a level of manipulation going on. And we were discussing earlier about the age of Yueh. Cynthia was saying he's 109, not much mention of his advanced age, but this is the wee bit that I was just going to point out to you, Cynthia. Where are we? And it's kind of what he uses it against Paul, I suppose. Let me see. Yeah. Indulge an old man's whim. There you go. That's it. And that's Yueh talking about himself. I'm an old man. Indulge an old man's whim, eh? It's one of those, I'm old, go on, do it for me, please. It's one of those kind of things. It was given to me when I was very young. And he thought, I must catch his mind as well as his cupidity. And there we go. That is a very interesting, very, very interesting statement indeed. Cupidity you can take for desire, if you like, but I must catch his mind as well as his desire. But it's desire, I suppose, cupidity, desire for stuff, things and possessions and wealth, that kind of thing is it's Latin cupere, isn't it? To cupidus, to desire. But it's a suggestion about greed, basically about Paul. And we've been talking about Paul's negative traits that whenever we do see them, we should point them out. One was about his sneering nose. I think that and as a physical quality, and Herbert works with that kind of stuff. But the other one here, and I think it's a very interesting word. If you do a search in the whole book, you'll only find cupidity used once. But it's Paul has an intellect, but it's a desire for wealth. And I think, as we'll see when we get to the next chapter, that's kind of to do with being an Atreides, and in all things about Paul, we should look to his father. But I think it's a very interesting word. Cynthia says, it reminds me of the Reverend Mother telling Paul that a man will come who will go with the Bene Gesserit cannot go into the male past lives. Yeah, and there is something of almost a religious initiation here. I suppose it's the passing over of this text, but it does have some, and we're not too sure by the end of this chapter what it is, but just at the point upon reading, as we'll get to a certain verse, and it really does have an impact upon. It has a massive impact upon Yueh, as we're about to find out. But it has a big impact upon Paul, and again starts to make him feel about this sense of what he'll continue to call his terrible purpose at this point. And the other, just a wee point again in terms of cupidity, we were talking about one of the star systems the other week, one of the planets in Dune, and its relationship to what was to do with Pisces, wasn't it? And it was to do that those stars are meant to represent, depending on which version, if you like, Venus and Cupid, Aphrodite and Eros, or one of those. So Venus and Cupid would be the Roman god versions there. That's just a reference to Cupid and Aphrodite and Eros, and of course it was about mother and son being on the run. So we have these very subtle, I suppose, if you were aware, little inter-references, I suppose, in relation to Paul and Jessica. I suppose they're really subtle. But as I said, if we were going looking at all these little, this is what we're finding out as we go. That's actually to do with this story, and that's to do with that story. That's interesting. But so the question I've written down here, so it's the bait. It's really the enticement to get Paul interested and take the gift, because he could refuse it, I suppose. And he could also go and say to his mum and dad, here, Doctor Yueh's just tried to give me this religious book, that's apparently really expensive. What's going on there? It would solicit questions, I think, from the family, just because of its age and worth. But it made me ask the question: is Paul venal as well as intellectual? Does he covet wealth and money and power, and all of these kind of things? And I suppose at this point, we've been told that his house is not wealthy in terms of the great houses. So it's very interesting, I think. As I said, all this to do with this Orange Catholic Bible. And Paul's told to open the Orange Catholic Bible at 467 Kalima. And again, we get this little bit, where are we? And of course, it's a very interesting little passage here. Indulge an old man's whim, Yueh said. It was given to me when I was very young, and he thought I must catch his mind as well as his cupidity. Open it to 467 Kalima, where it says, from water does all life begin. And then there's a slight notch on the edge of the cover to mark the place. So I suppose that depiction of that quotation itself, and that's how this passage is supposed to begin. And it's just to point out the word Kalima here in relation to the Orange Catholic Bible is meant to be, as I said, a hybrid created by the CET of all of these different religions. So within Islam, we have the 6 Kalimas, or the 6 Kalima, and I think it's also pronounced Kalimat. But I've got an English transliteration is the Al Kalimat As Sit. And apologies to any Arabic speakers. And now, what this is in Islam are the 6 traditions, or 6 phrases or prayers recited by Muslims. So Paul's meant to open up at one of the. So again, these would be the 467 traditions or phrases or prayers, if you like, for recital. If you want to look these up in terms of Islam, look up the 6 Kalimas, Kalimas, on Wikipedia, and of course you'll see them there. A couple of them are quite famous. I would say, even if you're not a Muslim, I recognized a couple of them myself. But I had a wee nosy over there. So again, we have an Islamic reference here within a Bible that arguably, if we didn't pay too much attention, is phrased as the Orange Catholic Bible, which suggests all sorts of hybrids of Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. So it really is a bit of a hybrid book, or hybrid Bible. And of course, instead of this quote about all life beginning with water, Paul opens it at the wrong section. Let me just find my wee place here, folks. Now, it's quite interesting. Paul felt the cover detected 2 notches. one shallower than the other. So this is one of these moments in June that Frank likes to talk about. We'll just read it first of all. Um, Paul Yuri tells him to read it aloud, and he thinks he's got the book open at the right place. Paul wet his lips with his tongue and read. Think you of the fact that a deaf person cannot hear? Then, what deafness may we not all possess? What senses do we lack that we cannot see and cannot hear another world all around us? What is there around us that we cannot? And I mean, stop it! Yuri, with a big exclamation mark, Yuri shouts at him, "Stop it!" Yuri uh, barked like a dog. And it's a very, very interesting little section. China says, from water does all life begin? Odd choice. Paul's headed to a vast desert, and Yuri is conspiring in Paul and Leto's deaths. Absolutely. Yes, yet he sells it to salve his conscience. Yeah, and it's not really I don't know. It's a bit like an atheist handing somebody a Bible and going, there you go, before stabbing them and robbing them. But saying I gave him a Bible, so at least he could understand a bit about God. This kind of thing. Maybe he got saved. It doesn't make sense, and I suppose from Yui's point of view, I think the sense that we're getting out there of that is that there's time before Paul's dead. I suppose it may give him a chance to get some sort of salvation or to take comfort in, whatever it is before he's, theoretically slaughtered by the Harkonnens. It doesn't quite make sense. And I think some of Yui's actions and thinking don't make sense as well, to be honest with you. Um, hmm. Can you give me a wee second, folks? I'm going to pause for just to quickly run out. I'm going to run to the loo and I'm going to blow my nose because I'm very, very badly bunged up. I'll be back in one wee second. Bear with me. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that, folks. Thanks for your patience. That feels a lot better. I'm just so bunged up at the minute. So we're getting battered very badly tonight. We have Storm Corey hitting us, and we're only after another quite a big one, Storm Malik, there the other day. So the weather is extremely bad here tonight, and as usual, the air pressure is all over the place. We live in a bit of a depression here. Pardon me. Oh, I think has my coffee gone cold? Mm. Not that that's a bad thing, I suppose. Now, is he trying to get caught, perhaps? Yeah, I don't know. It almost seems, and I think sometimes I think that I wonder about Paul's perception of things that if Yuri's trying to sort of avoid Jessica's kind of scrutiny. I think Paul's ability should certainly pick up on things maybe a bit as well, but I think it's maybe just the confusion of maybe sometimes a young a teenager observing adults. If you see what I mean, I get that wee bit of a sense from Paul in this chapter when it especially when Yueh snaps here. But yeah, it could be. And I suppose that there's a couple of other things to do with, why is Yueh doing this? And if it's out for revenge, why not strike at the Baron, etc. And if his wife's already dead, and that we know that she's not alive, there's a couple of clues to it, I suppose. We're about to get to them, but we're already told that there's a death date with a question mark. Which is, I suppose, five years prior to the action. But I often kind of went with the idea, and again, it's maybe looking at this story in this level of detail. That I always kind of got the sense that there was a chance his wife wasn't dead. But having kind of looked at this chapter, I'm not so sure, to be honest. So yeah, and of course, Paul opens it at this passage. Let me see. Sorry, I'll just go from there again. Just I wasn't too sure where I got to there. Paul wet his lips with his tongue. Read, "Think of you the fact that a deaf person cannot hear. Then what deafness may we not all possess? What senses do we lack that we cannot see and cannot hear another world all around us? What is there around us that we cannot?" And of course, he's cut off. I think that's particularly interesting. I think that's partly that little statement is to do with Herbert's ecological message in the story. What we can and can't see around us, I suppose. I also think quite interesting that Paul wets his lips moisture, that this is a holy book he's about to be reading from. And I think in particular that, as we know, that association with giving moisture to the dead, etc. By the time we get to the end of the book, that can be interpreted here as a sign of respect, if you like, for the OC Bible. So I suppose it's the question that this little passage is asking is if a deaf person can't hear, then how are we all, in the sense that we're all deaf in terms of the things that are all around us that we cannot see, cannot hear, cannot interact with. That it's similar. Similar to having this lack of sense, and of course the world around us. I think, and particularly in this reference, I suppose this is Juana's favorite passage, isn't it? And as a Bene Gesserit, I think that this is all to do with nature in itself. And I might be wrong, just how I'm interpreting it at the minute. But of course, he's lost control here. He barks, "Stop it!" This barks at Paul, and it's a complete loss of control. And very, very short little statements there. "Stop it!" You bark. Boom, boom, boom. And again, Paul's like, "Oh," and again, this kind of teenage, "I'm going to stare at you." I think it's particularly funny at this point, but it feels very real for a teenager to behave that way. I think, as much as we're getting a sense that Paul's a bit beyond all of this, if you like. It's also pointing to the fact that the Atreides are deaf and blind to the traitor in their midst. Very good point, Jaya. Absolutely, and of course we're almost screaming. We know, we can see that we absolutely know that this guy is the traitor. And of course, each little time there where Paul doesn't figure it out, it's kind of, oh, for goodness sake, come on, are you going to get there or not? So again, it's a great way of working tension, on the reader, I suppose. I think it's a particularly good technique, I think. And of course, it's a particularly interesting point in the book because it is, and I actually wrote this a little bit earlier, and then I'll kind of come back to it. But is this a random error? Is this just the universe making a simple mistake on Doctor Yueh, or is it a subconscious action by him, if you like? Of course, there are two passages that are marked, and Paul's well aware of this. And of course, there's something wrong, Doctor Yueh. I'm sorry. That was one of my dead wife's favorite passages. It's not the one I intended you to read. It brings up memories that are painful, and we have this association again. Remember Paul talking about Gurney Halleck's scar, the pain, and the pain association with the Gom Jabbar. Here's Doctor Yueh's pain, if you like, and of course Paul matter of factly says there are 2 notches on it. You said, next time you said they open one notch, open the notch section. There are of course 2, and we knew that prior to this, so it kind of frames the 2 notches that Paul notices open the book, and then we have there's 2 notches, kind of frames this wee section here a wee bit. And my dead wife, there you go, that's the admission, she's dead. And I think at this point, as much as Chai is saying that the Atreides are deaf and blind, if Paul has a sense about the truth about him, some of these things might ring out, I suppose. Sometimes statements that the characters make, I think, are quite neutral in relation to the truth, as that they can't be perceived as being falsehoods, if you like, the way they're phrased. And of course, we get another internal monologue from Yueh here. Of course, so his wife must have marked the passage. It was her favorite passage. I suppose his fingers are more sensitive than mine, and found her mark. It was accident, no more. This comment here, it was an accident, nothing more. And I suppose the question that we need to ask about this is, Lulu, skip to the loo, says Joseph, was it an accident? And I actually came up with a couple of things. I was wondering, did Wana as a Bene Gesserit have the sight and foresee this moment? Possibly, and I thought that was a bit of a stretch because we don't really find out too much about her. But I was just wondering, was this a foreseen thing in terms of her being a Bene Gesserit? But in particular, I suppose from the plot point is that one of the things that Herbert wanted to demonstrate, and this is an example of this. I think Yueh's interpretation here is correct. It is an accident, and it's probably maybe a fortuitous one. But simply put, that regardless of all of these different houses and different groups and different organizations within the Empire, and all the plans and careful planning and thought and plans within plans, etc., is simply this: accident and random chance govern the world and its actions more often than we like to think. And that's a particular thing that Frank wanted to point out here. And I think so the book opening here at this point nearly gives Dr. Yueh away. I think it's a moment of where he drops all of his calm and composure. And I think if for example, if Jessica had been in the room when that had happened, it would have caused him to have come under scrutiny, I think, and I think he would have been found out eventually. But yeah, the imperial conditioning, he's human. And I also started to wonder about that. What's that about? And is it possibly kind of, hypnotic or subliminal and chemical kind of implantations or something like that? What is it that makes a Sook doctor so trustworthy? What is this conditioning, if you like, And they're good questions to ask, Cynthia says, Yueh must suspect that Wana is still alive. Otherwise, how could he be manipulated by the Harkonnens? Her death is the official story that he repeats to deflect attention. Yeah, I see. That's the sense that I would get, that it's, as much as we have the question of the death, my wife's dead, the real suggestion is that she's not. And China says later, Yueh doesn't know for sure. Yeah, she's dead until he stands in front of the barn. It's still an open question at that point. Paul's truth sense should have detected the uncertainty in Yueh's statement. Yeah. And I suppose at this point, maybe it is that within that kind of thing, that is it maybe that he had a sense that she still was a captive under the Harkonnens for a while, but that that he's deluding himself that she was still alive. It does make you ask a few questions about what's happened to Wana. I want to know what happened to Wana, and I said within the historical document, there's a year given there, and then a question mark. So I certainly think then that, after a point in history where one is dead, and surely, one's memories would occur somewhere inside Semuflo or inside the Bene Gesserit um, other memory. And that's kind of the point that always thought we could get an answer. I think not maybe at this point in the book, but I think we could get an answer as to what happened to Wana. And I think there's something in the Denis Villeneuve film is a bit suggestive of a spider monster thing or something that might be her. I don't know. It's just something that they've created, but yeah, I don't know. Some people were saying, is that Wana? And some people were suggesting it was a Tlilaxu device, I think. I don't know. It was a curious thing to see. But it makes us ask a lot of questions about Yueh. And I'll tell you something, Chaya, it's one of those things that I've talked about, not to jump off Dune very quickly. But let me see. Oh, I'm reading it next door. I've talked about The Demolished Man as a book, and in terms of it's a kind of perfect murder novel, the premise for what's happening in the book is in the character's head, and when it's one of those books where you kind of wonder was his motivation correct from the very beginning, and it's kind of to do with lying to yourself. If you see what I mean, he's lying to himself. And it's one of those things that you either notice it at the very start of the book, and you'll notice it at the end of the book. And it's one of those books that if you hang on a minute, if you don't notice at the end of the book, you go back to the start of the book and you went, I got tricked too. It's one of those. I just get that sense that what is the reality of the situation with Yueh? We're not too sure, but it makes sense that if he's operating to kind of get Wana out of there if she's still alive, So yeah, just to point out that's one of those accidents, I think, and it really does nearly give him away. I think it sort of gives him, I suppose, it gives a reasonable insight into his psychological state, a little bit anyway, to Paul, that he's a bit, whoa, and so it's to do with his dead wife. Therefore, I suppose that's enough to mitigate that a bit. We could understand why something like that would be such a raw subject for him, Only if she'd been given her memories to another Bene Gesserit before or as she died. Is that how it works? I suppose that must mean they can lose lines, I suppose. I don't know. It's a wee bit tricky, isn't it, sometimes? But yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a bit like uploading your memory, isn't it? Well, how does that work for all the other women throughout history? Then Shia, who before Bene Gesserits came along, they have the entire female line, don't they? It's to do with the I don't know, the collective unconscious and all of that stuff. Once we start looking at that kind of stuff, it starts to break down a wee bit for us. I think we better suspend our disbelief a wee bit, Oh dear. So yeah. At this point, I suppose we're near the end of the chapter, folks. This was not too long a chapter as the next one will be. So from my point of view, that's not too bad a thing, I suppose. But yeah, so you'll again to regain Paul's interest. He said regurgitate his interest there. To regain Paul's interest again, he sort of tries to aim at his intellectual curiosity. He tells him that this is a book that has some historical truth to it and has good ethical philosophy. So these things that appeal to Paul: history and ethics, philosophy, truth. So again, we get this little thing just at the end here. Paul looks at this little book in his hand, this little miniature Bible. And again, I suppose he notes that it's a small thing. And I suppose one of the things that we also note is that Paul is small for his age. And within it is contained a mystery, like Paul. And as he looks at it, something had happened to him. We're told that something had happened to him while he read it, and that made something stir this phrase again, what Paul calls his terrible purpose. What is his raison d'etre, if you like? And I suppose at this point within the chapter, the father's about to come along. We're going to see Leto in the next chapter, but we're, basically Dr. Yueh reiterates this, and your father will be here any minute. Put the book away. It'll be our secret. This kind of thing. So again, doesn't want the book to come. It's not just Jessica's Bene Gesserit training that Dr. Yueh, wishes that he doesn't want Leto to look at this Bible either. It would bring it under too much scrutiny, bring himself under too much scrutiny. And certainly if Leto is interested in wealth, it might be a curiosity, to him as well. So Paul puts the book away, and the only one interesting thing here, just as we get to the end of the chapter here, is a little comment on Paul's character here. We have seen moments with where Paul's had fear up until now, and we've seen actually a range of emotions with a number of the characters, but fear appearing here and there. And of course, fear is going to be quite a big thing in this book, with our response to the litany against fear. Fear is the mind killer, this kind of thing, and it's just what he's afraid of. And it was to do with when Yueh barked at him. For a moment there, when Yueh had barked at him, Paul had feared the man would demand the book's return. And I've made a little question mark here. What was he afraid of? What was he? Oh my goodness, my tutor's totally lost his temper. Am I afraid I've offended him? Am I afraid he's going to be violent? No, I'm afraid he wants his really expensive antique book back. And I don't want that's what he's afraid of. And whether it's to do with his sense of terrible purpose having read that passage, or to do with what Dr. Yueh is trying to bait him with, which is his intellect and his cupidity, his desire to own things and wealth and possessions, etc. And I just thought it was an interesting question. Why is he afraid that? Why does Dr. Yueh's response solicit a fear of having to give the book back? I suppose. Just was Dr. Yueh's analysis of Paul correct about his cupidity? And I think he was. I think that's the interesting thing. So Paul basically thanks Yueh for the gift in a formal manner, and again asks if he can reciprocate. And of course, Yueh says no, and that he needs for nothing. And Yueh's thoughts basically close the chapter here, asking, why am I torturing myself? Why am I torturing this kid, Paul? Makes us understand that Paul's ignorant of this. He doesn't know what I'm doing. Damn those Harkonnen beasts. And let's just read through his last wee sort of thought process here. Why do I stand here torturing myself and torturing this poor lad, though he does not yet know it? Oi, damn those Harkonnen beasts. Why did they choose me for their abomination? That's kind of interesting. It says that if we think about it, then the words are particular, but the Harkonnens chose him. They picked him. And it is a good question. Why? Possibly because they have his wife. That's why they've chosen to do whatever it is they've done. To Yueh. And his sympathy is there for Paul, poor lad. And I suppose the other little, why did they choose me to be their abomination? That thing of foreboding that we turn away from, which is what I suppose an abomination is, in its literal sense. But the word abomination is going to have another meaning in this book, of course, to do with the preborn and Alia as well. And we come to the end of the chapter, I suppose, with a sense of foreboding. And from my point of view, just thinking about it, we get starting to worry a bit about Paul if we're the reader. and he is literally at this point. The snake is in the room with him. The person that's going to bring his downfall is actually in the room with him right now. He's very relaxed, and it's one of those. Ooh, is it? Up until this point, we can maybe wondering: is he going to strike? What's he going to do? And our fears are kind of, you know, um, waylaid at this point. That we get through the chapter without Yueh having done anything harmful to Paul. We see Paul basically being in a position of trust. Where arguably, there's one or two situations here where Paul is very vulnerable indeed. For all of the house security, all the castles, um, I suppose it's the thing that's inside you, inside the castle with you, if you like. And yeah, it kind of makes me think of that kind of. I don't know if my favorite Edgar Allan Poe story is probably The Mask of the Red Death, and that sense of the things inside you can make yourself safe and secure inside the house, etc. Lock out the world, but the thing that's going to kill you is inside the house with you the whole time. That kind of thing. I'll just check your comments there, folks. Anyway, so only what they receive at conception. Chai was saying that was in relation to the Bene Gesserit other memory. I think Ganima explains it. Yeah, we'll have to have a wee nosy at that when we get there. Cynthia says we're told that the Atreides value gestures and formality. So one reason may be that Paul is afraid of getting the gesture of gift giving wrong. Yeah, I think it's an odd situation for him to be in with this tutor. And I suppose these are just little blips. We've seen three of them in a row, haven't we? We've seen in comes in the previous chapter we had Thufir, and then we had Gurney, and we had that real sort of moment of doubt about trust with Gurney, and of course Paul's sense of shame, and then in comes Yueh in this chapter, and we have foreknowledge. Oh, you shouldn't trust this guy at all, and he seems to be more, even Doctor Yueh's bark here doesn't seem to be that bad to Paul. It's kind of more his response is after a bit of staring, which he tends to do. Are you okay? You're having a moment, that kind of thing. But it doesn't make him. I suppose it doesn't make him react in a similar way to how he reacts briefly to Gurney in the previous passage. It's not this. Whoa, this guy with imperial conditioning's just gone nuts over I've read a wrong passage from a book. What have I done? What's his problem? But I suppose it makes Yueh seem more human to Paul in that sense. The admission about his wife's death, that kind of thing, kind of makes the outburst. It makes it understandable, makes it relatable, and I suppose from Paul's point of view, maybe give him a bit of sympathy for Yueh. I think the idea is it's also meant to give us a bit of sympathy too for Yueh, and that maybe the situation isn't quite as much as we'll get these little epigraphs about Yueh, etc., and they'll keep coming. I think but is it the one, the thousand deaths? Isn't yeah, there we go. It's from a few chapters down the road. Yueh, Yueh, Yueh goes the refrain. 1,000,000 deaths were not enough for Yueh. And that's another one of our nice sayings from A Child's History of Muad'Dib. So, 1,000,000 deaths are not enough for this guy. This guy's treachery is going to be pretty bad, and it is, I suppose, one of the things that drives the plot. But he's certainly there's a lot more to Doctor Yueh. And again, we've seen two out of no, we've seen them all actually. In terms of the new Denis Villeneuve's Dune, I think the characters of Thufir, Gurney certainly fleshed out a bit, but Thufir and Doctor Yueh and Piter, just we've got an introduction to all of these guys here, and they're wonderful characters. They're quite weird and wacky and slightly grotesque. Some of them, Piter's certainly an off the wall nut. I think. I think Piter is certainly a very very fun character. And Doctor Yueh, yeah, there's a lot to him. He's quite, again, this is our Machiavellian character, if you like. He's being a bit sneaky. He's highly intelligent, and he's kind of doing, something bad that ultimately, I suppose, everything that Yueh does is runs the action in Dune, if you like. As much as we could say it's all to do with Jessica having a girl instead of a boy, arguably the universe would still be in its kind of place at this point. But yeah, Doctor Yueh and what's happened to his wife is the driving force of the plot that brings about the fall of the Atreides. And I suppose if it wasn't him, we get the sense from the Baron previously that it could have been somebody else. Let's have a look. It's all the Atreides value gestures and formalities. So one reason maybe that Paul's afraid of getting the gesture of gift wrong. I thought he wanted to look at it later as a way to explore the mystery of his terrible purpose. Though I suppose he could have gotten his hands on another OC Bible pretty easily. Yeah. I think I think that's it. It's not just that it's a Bible. Here's a book, or here's just a sugar wire Bible. I'm sure they must be. And if things like this are commonly made for space travel because of, I suppose, size, weight, just that kind of thing. And again, this is from a time before ebooks and stuff like that. So it gives us the interesting thing is it's a very, very short chapter, this one. It's only a few pages. That's kind of me done running through it, I suppose. But we get so much detail within that small section on Yueh, and really, as we are getting into his head a little bit, and he's an odd character, and I think in some ways I think Yueh is framed in some ways as a religious character, as we move along throughout the Dune universe. As much as we learn different things about, we're told earlier on that we can't have the light without the darkness. We can't understand these things, if you see what I mean. And yeah, I think it introduces quite a lot, I suppose, here. And ultimately, he's a tragic character, no matter what. There's, and we don't quite get the sense of what's happened here. It adds to our level of mystery, and of course, we'll get that explored as well. What has happened to Wanda. We're kind of curious to know as we go. And yeah, I suppose he's he's an odd character, I think, but yeah, I don't know what you think about Yueh, but the one thing I will say, I mean, once badly misused. Badly misused. I was going to say badly underused. Very underused in the new film, and I just thought very little of his character there. And I think that's generally my big problem with the new movie. I suppose the characterization is pretty bad. And as I said, we've got one more chapter to go, folks, and we'll be having a look at that, chapter 6, on Thursday. And we're finally going to get to meet Leto, and of course, it's another set of lessons for us, I suppose, because in the things that we want to know about Paul, we should look at the father, because this is where we're going to get told this idea of what is the son but an extension of his father, this kind of thing, which I suppose has a certain kind of religious connotation to it as well. But we're going to finally get a look at this Red Duke that everybody so admires, this Leto the First, who we should pay attention to, and that his qualities as a father have been overlooked. We've been told quite a bit about him so far, and from different people's points of view. But we have yet to meet him, so that's going to be fun. And there we go. So quite a wee bit of detail within a very small few pages there. And then, of course, once we do meet Leto and have this final interaction, and really what's been happening here is that, as I said, particularly the last chapter, we were told about Paul not having any friends, but he had the most wonderful companion teachers. And the list of people that we've had is Gurney Halleck, Thufir Hawat, who we've both met. We've had Duncan Idaho and Dr. Wellington Yueh. We haven't met Duncan yet, and then we have Lady Jessica and the Duke Leto. So in terms of all of the people that are teaching Paul within the setting of Caladan, the next one we're going to have a look at is Leto. And so we'll eventually get to Duncan and then, as I said, once we met with Leto, then the chapter after that, then our whole shift takes this family that we've just met, uproots them, and off we go to Arrakis, and we get to sort of start investing in our examination of the book, I suppose, through through the Atreides family. And we'll see that it's the same room, same framing for the next chapter that Herbert uses. But yeah, we've got a fair bit of introduction there. We've got a little bit more about the Fremen, a little bit more about Arrakis, a little bit more about the worms, a little bit more about Melange, and and a little bit of background on the plot. And we have a couple of more characters. Well, I think mainly just the one here's Leet Kynes and Wana Marcus, who is Doctor Yueh's wife. And both of these characters are absent at this point. They're not, and our sense is that Wana Marcus is dead within the story at this point, which I think she probably is. So yeah, and of course, also a couple of other things in particular, I suppose, about this. I suppose there's a couple of wee comments I made about just the animals that are brought to Arrakis from Earth, the tyrannic animals and plants. We haven't got to those yet, but we will engage a little bit. It was just the sort of point, I think, that I was wondering whenever we were talking about the giant worms on Arrakis, and I made a wee note that there appears to be, as much as there appears to be no megafauna or megaflora on Arrakis, gigantic animals, gigantic plants. And I just put megafauna, no, megaflora, no, both ? Yes. And I put because the worm is meant to be an animal plant hybrid, but it's not from Arrakis. And I suppose Doctor Yueh wondering about investigating which animals that the planet has been kind to and which ones it hasn't, I suppose. One of the mysteries of Dune is going to be where did the worms come from? I suppose what are the worms as well, but where did they come from? And we do find out ultimately that they're animal plant hybrids of some kind. Of my own suspicion is that they come from Earth, if you like. So it was just a little bit about that, and of course we do get a little bit more about the religion of Dune. Not too much, but it's just in terms of if we're looking up words and trying to figure out what if we're not aware of what they mean, we have it is taking us all over the place at the minute, isn't it? We've had several forms of Christianity. We've had Taoism. We've had some Buddhism. We've had Islam. I think we've had Judaism as well. And yeah, culturally and religiously, the book is, if we're going to delve a wee bit, it's taking us all over the place. We've got Celtic religions in there as well. As I said, but we'll get into the thing with the worm at some point. But there we go. So let's have a wee look just to catch. We've got all our wee comments. I think I'm going to explore the mystery of the terrible purpose. I suppose it could have got his hands on another OC Bible pretty easily. Yeah, I think that what you were saying there previously, Chai, is that it's whenever he is reading it, that fight, there is a moment there. And as we can ask it, or is it to do with his cupidity? Is it that he really wants to hang on to this thing? Or is it because he's had that moment with it and wishes, is it the object or is it that particular passage that stirred his terrible purpose? And of course, we all know that whatever it is that Dr. Yueh's up to, whatever it's the Harkonnens have done this, and that they have chose him to be their abomination. And again, the actions left hanging for us. We're going to, Duke Leto's been arriving. He's finally going to get there. So there we go, folks. That'll have to do us for today. I suppose that's the quickest one yet. I have to say, we're just coming up to 11 o'clock, and it's nice for me to have a couple of smaller chapters, I suppose. But just in case of going through our wee annotated book here, we've got a ridiculous amount, but we did over 44 kind of little notes for that chapter alone, and I think we're averaging out about 90 on the main ones. But it's quite interesting. I'm putting together quite an odd little book as we go. I'm quite enjoying it, as I hope you guys are too, by the way. Thank you very much for joining us. But I am a bit bunged up, as always. But I have to say, folks, I'm going to say goodnight tonight now and boogie on, because I just want a little bit of a Sunday night chill. And I've got a lot more work to do for you guys for the next chapter. So we will see you hopefully at 9 o'clock on Thursday at GMT for our walkthrough of chapter 6 of Frank Herbert's Dune. And I know it's a wee bit short tonight, this one, but thank you. We tore through it. It's pretty much done a good couple of hours on it. So thank you very much for joining us. Cynthia says, thanks. You're more than welcome, Cynthia. And yeah, thanks very much for your contributions, folks. As always, it's great. And I'll say goodnight and take care of yourselves no matter where you are. All the very best now, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.